too far? Should kids be off limits in horror? Let's dive into it. So Terrifier 3 just released a very Christmassy teaser trailer, and in the trailer it hints at the fact that some children might face some harm in this next installment. Some people on Twitter are not happy about it, insist that children should be off limits, especially in a film like Terrifier. A lot of people, myself included, disagree with that sentiment. If the story calls for it, why not? Some horror movies are meant to be shocking, and certain acts add to that shock value. I don't know what's gonna happen in Terrifier 3. I don't know how brutal the kills are gonna be towards the children, but I think people can decide for themselves if they can handle that sort of thing, and if they can't, just don't watch it. There are plenty horror movies in the genre that dare to harm children, and I want to talk about some of my favorites. We're bound to get into some spoiler territory here, so I'll leave some timestamps below. If you don't want to hear me talk about those movies, just skip on ahead. First movie on the list is Pet Sematary, which hinges entirely on the story of a child's death. So this story is based on the Stephen King book of the same name, and it centers on a family that move into a new home that have a mysterious pet cemetery behind their house. And this pet cemetery has magical powers. Our lead character is urged never to bury anything in that cemetery for fear of terrible consequences. But our lead character's son is brutally killed by a Mack truck that comes driving down the road, and his little son runs out into the road and he can't get to him in time. It's one of the most heart-wrenching moments in horror. It's a parent's worst nightmare, and we see how the death affects this family, how they kind of fall apart. It makes you question, if you could bring a loved one back to life, would you bury them in a pet cemetery? Would you do so even if there were terrible consequences? This story just feels shocking. It's all about grief and parenthood and loss, and I feel like without going to that extra step of showing the death of this child, it wouldn't have had the same impact or power. Next up is It, the remake from Andy Muschietti. This one starts off with a horrific moment involving a child. The character of Georgie, he's outside playing in the rain with his little paper rainboat, and it falls down a drain where he unfortunately meets Pennywise. And Pennywise basically tricks him into sticking his arm in the drain to play, and Pennywise decides to chomp on that arm. Poor little Georgie becomes the first victim that we see in the movie. It kicks off the rest of the story where you realize, holy crap, they are gonna go there and none of these children in this story are going to be safe. And that story is entirely focused on children and childhood fears. So the whole moment with Georgie, the anticipation, you just want to grab him and get him out of harm's way, but you don't think that you're gonna see what you see. It's so violent, it's so shocking, it's prolonged, and it's just really heartbreaking. But again, this death is important to the story, especially for the character of Bill, who's struggling with his brother's loss after it and trying to figure out who this Pennywise is and how to stop him. Next, we have Pumpkinhead, which has a really heartbreaking death. This story is about a father who loses his son by a tragic, stupid accident of these outsiders who were in town. They run this little boy over and they kill him. Father gets home, he's not having it, and he brings his son back and he basically rocks him in his arms while he dies. And it's one of the most devastating moments in horror. Lance Henriksen is just fantastic as this father going through this horrific moment, and you really understand why he would go and find Pumpkinhead and summon him to get revenge on these kids, because I wanted to go and get revenge on these kids for doing what they did. So it's just really the gut punch that you need to kick off the story, and I feel like it was handled very well. It wasn't gratuitous. It felt too real, which is what was shocking to me. It's just very sad because you get those moments between the father and son that are nice and sweet before you get to see him get taken away in such a horrible, senseless way. It's one of the best, saddest moments in horror that deals with kids. Next, we have Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. Yeah, that's the one without Michael Myers, but it's a fantastically weird, creepy, atmospheric story about this evil corporation that's creating these masks that are marketed towards children to wear on Halloween. And on Halloween night, they're gonna activate these masks, and these masks will essentially kill the kids. And we get to see how they work because they test them out on this family that's in this factory doing a tour. And one of the kids, he's wearing the mask, and that jingle comes on the TV. It's very catchy and fun, but what's happening to this boy is absolutely horrific. It's really shocking, but it's important to the story because it highlights how just dark and dangerous this corporation is. How they don't care. They just want to do what they need to do to get power, and they don't care who is harmed in the process. It's kind of fun to watch though, when you watch it with the jingle. And the kid who gets killed was really annoying, so you're like, I get it. Next we have Hereditary, which is the Ari Aster film that destroyed my soul when I watched it because it's just so heavy and dark, and it has one of the most shocking death scenes I've ever witnessed. So this story centers on a family that has just lost their matriarch, and they're dealing with a lot. One day, the mother tells her son Peter to bring his younger sister with him to like this party. He doesn't want to, the sister doesn't even want to go, but the mother just wants them out of the house, basically. Bad idea, because Peter just wants to have fun. He doesn't really want to be with his sister, so he's not paying attention to her. And when she's at this party, she finds some like brownies or something, or cake, and she starts eating it. It has nuts in it, and guess what? She's allergic to nuts, severely allergic, and she doesn't have an EpiPen. So she goes to Peter, she can barely breathe. He's like, fuck. He rushes out into the car. They're speeding down the highway. He's trying to get her help. She literally cannot breathe, and she sticks her head out of the car to get some air. He swerves to avoid hitting some animal, and her head smacks into a pole, and she's done. She's gone. And he's just sitting there, like, in shock. And just the events following that are absolutely so heartbreaking. They feel so real. But even just that initial moment, you're in shock with Peter and you're like, wait a minute, that didn't just happen, did it? When you see it, and it's just such a brutal way to go out for a character that seems sweet, just the aftermaths and what that death means to the rest of the story, it was necessary. But damn, did he have to go that hard? Because I remember just not being able to breathe after that moment. Then we have Evil Dead Rise, which is the latest in the Evil Dead series. This is set in a high-rise apartment, and it involves this family who are basically battling against deadites. And a part of the family are children, and the children are not off limits in this. Some of the stuff that happens to the kids in this is very shocking and brutal. So over the top with the gore and violence that it's almost cartoonish to me, which I think makes it a little easier to stomach. You're like, this is ridiculous. Just the way that it plays out, it's almost funny. Next is When Evil Lurks, which is a new movie that's on Shudder. It's a possession horror movie that is extremely disturbing and violent. It is so chaotic, and it just never slows down once it picks up. And if you don't like your horror to harm kids, don't watch this movie. Don't watch it, okay? Because this movie harms some kids in some pretty brutal ways. So this story centers on these two brothers who stumble into this situation where they find a possessed person at a home of a neighbor. They take it upon themselves to remove the possessed person and kind of drop them off somewhere in the middle of nowhere. It goes wrong, obviously, and the evil starts to come after them in various ways. And this evil doesn't give a crap if you're young, if you're old. It's just gonna get you, and it's gonna make you do horrible things. And later on in the film, our character, one of the brothers, is a father, and he goes home to basically pick up his ex-wife and his kids to bring them somewhere so they can escape town, escape this evil. But there is a situation involving a dog and this little girl that is horrific. And you know it's coming, and the animal lunges at this little girl, and the rest is history. A little bit later in the story, another child is brutally harmed by his undead mother, and it's just shocking. It will make you gasp. It took my breath away, these moments, because it's just so brutal and so violent. You don't think that they're gonna actually go there, but they go there. And it's just a bleak, sad story. So I feel like it all makes sense. It's highlighting just the dangers of evil. You can't escape it, no matter who you are. It's like The Exorcist. Speaking of The Exorcist deals with a child who is possessed by the devil. She has no control over her body. She's doing horrible things to herself. She's saying horrific things. She's not herself because her body is being assaulted by this demonic presence. What makes it harder to watch is because you get to see her as her innocent self with her mother before all the craziness happens. And you just see she's this adorable little girl. She's so innocent. She didn't do anything to deserve this. But again, evil doesn't care. Demonic forces don't care how old you are. They're gonna take you. And just the fact that this little innocent girl goes through literal hell. It's horrifying to watch. There are so many moments in horror where children are harmed in the story. Children are a big antagonist in this story, and I think it's done very well for the most part. Those are just a few of the ones that I thought were done really well. They're not so over the top and gratuitous as I assume Terrifier might be, but you never know. The movie's not here yet. We don't know where they're gonna go, but if it's dealing with Santa, a Santa arc, yeah, he's gonna kill some kids dressed as Santa and ruin Christmas for everyone. Let me know what your thoughts are on harming kids in horror. Are you for it or against it? What are your thoughts on the new Terrifier 3 movie coming out? Thanks so much for watching, guys. I will catch you next time. Bye.